He walked into the lobby of the Hargrove Grand, carrying a duffel bag with a broken zipper and a cup of gas station coffee, and Meridith Cane had him removed before he made it to the front desk. She didn't ask his name. She didn't ask who he was there to see. She looked at the scuffed boots and the work jacket with the sleeve fraying at the left cuff, and she made a decision in approximately 4 seconds that would cost her hotel a $340 million contract, and eventually her chairman's trust and nearly her career. The man smiled when the security guard touched his arm. That should have been the first warning sign. It wasn't. 47 minutes after he left the building, Meredith's phone rang. She was in a board meeting on the 14th floor, reviewing renovation cost projections, when her assistant knocked and came in without waiting, which she had been told never to do. She did it anyway because some pieces of news don't wait for the right moment. The Whitfield Group was withdrawing from all partnership discussions, effective immediately, no renegotiation, no appeal. The man with the broken zipper on his bag was Nathan Whitfield. He'd built Whitfield Development from a single construction crew in rural Tennessee into one of the most respected real estate investment groups in the country. He had a 9-year-old daughter named Maisie who collected geological samples and corrected adults about igneous rock formations. He drove a used pickup truck and bought his coffee from gas stations because he'd worked in them at 16 and believed in loyalty to the places that had fed you when you needed feeding. He'd come to the Hargrove Grand that morning specifically because he'd wanted to see how the hotel treated people who didn't look like money. Meredith had answered that question faster than he'd expected. She didn't sleep that night. She lay on her back in the dark of the suite. She kept on the hotel's 10th floor, one of the original perks she'd negotiated when she took the general manager position 7 years ago, and had promoted herself to hotel president 2 years after that, and she stared at the ceiling and tried to reconstruct the morning in enough detail to understand exactly where the wrong decision had compounded into disaster. The Whitfield partnership had been 18 months in the making. Her CFO, a meticulous man named Gerald Park, had laid out the numbers in a presentation last fall that had made the room go quiet. Whitfield Development didn't just bring capital. They brought 30 years of construction relationships, regional government contacts in 14 states, and a track record of hotel rehabilitations that had turned 4 failing properties into destinations within 3 years of acquisition. The Hargrove Grand was not failing, but it was aging, and aging without the right partner meant a slow, respectable slide toward irrelevance in a market that rewarded spectacle and punished sentiment. The deal was supposed to change all of that. She'd spent 6 weeks preparing. She'd rebuilt the proposal twice. She'd personally reviewed the financial projections until she could recite them at 2 in the morning, which she had, standing at her kitchen window while the city ran its night circuits below. It hadn't been enough. She got up at 5:40 and made coffee and sat at the small desk in her suite and did the thing she'd been trained to do when things went wrong. She rebuilt the timeline. The man had walked in at 9:53. He'd been carrying the bag. He'd been wearing the jacket. He'd been heading toward the concierge desk, which was technically correct. Whitfield Development's assistant had confirmed him for a 10 o'clock walkthrough of the property, not a formal meeting. He was supposed to see the building as a guest would see it. He'd wanted to see it the way anyone would see it, and she'd had him walked out before he reached the desk. She looked at the wall of her suite and thought about the expression on his face when the guard touched his arm. She hadn't been close enough to see it clearly. She'd been across the lobby in conversation with her head of events, barely paying attention, just tracking the movement in her peripheral vision, the way she always tracked movement in the lobby, because the lobby was the first thing and the last thing, and it had to be right. She'd seen the jacket. She'd seen the bag. She'd made the call without asking a single question. She opened her laptop and pulled up every piece of public information on Nathan Whitfield that she could find. There wasn't much. He didn't do profiles. There were 3 trade publication mentions, 1 regional business magazine feature from 4 years ago that he'd apparently agreed to only because the proceeds went to a rural literacy program, and a brief mention in a Wall Street Journal piece about unconventional real estate investors that had described him as someone who built things quietly and let the buildings speak. The magazine feature had a photograph. He'd clearly been reluctant about it. There was something in his posture that suggested a man who had agreed to stand still for the camera and was already thinking about the next thing. He was wearing a flannel shirt. He was standing in front of a property in Kentucky that his company had rebuilt from a condemned warehouse into a boutique inn that had been fully booked for the past 2 years. There was a quote near the end of the article that she read 3 times. I've never understood the instinct to impress people before you know what you're building together. You find out what a person is when they don't know they're being watched. She set her laptop down. She looked at the city coming up outside her window, the sky doing its early gray thing before it decided to be morning. She thought about what it meant that he'd walked in specifically the way he had, without announcement, without a name badge, without anything that would have signaled to a hotel lobby, trained to read those signals that he was anything other than what he appeared to be. He'd wanted to see what kind of place this was. She'd shown him. She called his office at 9 in the morning. It rang 4 times. She left a message, professional and direct, asking for 5 minutes of his time at his convenience. She said she understood the decision had been made and that she was not calling to contest it. She said she'd like to understand, if he was willing, what had specifically influenced it. He called back 22 minutes later. Mrs. Cane, he said, his voice was even, Tennessee in it, but not performed, the kind that was just there from years of existing in a place. Thank you for calling back, she said. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, he said. What can I do for you? I want to apologize, she said. Not a professional apology, an actual one. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, just real. What happened yesterday was wrong, she said. Not because of how it ended, because of how it started. I made a judgment in 4 seconds about who you were based on what you were carrying, and I acted on that judgment without asking a single question. That's not the kind of hotel I want to run. The line was quiet for a moment. You didn't make the call, he said. Your security guard did. My security guard was doing what the culture of my lobby has trained him to do, she said. That's on me, not on him. Another pause. Longer this time. You called yourself, he said, not your assistant. Yes. Why does that matter to you? Because it should, she said. And if it didn't, I wouldn't deserve the call back. He was quiet for a moment, and she let the quiet sit without filling it, which was something she'd always been bad at and was practicing. Where do you get your coffee in the morning, he said finally. She blinked. The hotel kitchen. Right, he said. I'll be at the diner on West Clement at 8 tomorrow. If you want to talk, come talk. He hung up. She looked at her phone. She went to West Clement at 7:55, which told her something about herself she already knew. The diner was the kind of place that had been there for 30 years and showed it, the good version of showing it. Worn counter stools, a pie case by the register, a waitress named Bev who knew the regulars by order. Nathan Whitfield was already in a corner booth with a mug of black coffee and a paper in front of him, not his phone, an actual folded newspaper, which she found unexpectedly disarming. He looked up when she came in. He nodded at the seat across from him. She sat down. Bev came over without being called and poured coffee without asking. You're early, he said. So are you. I'm always early, he said. It's a habit from job sites. The work tells you things in the first hour that it hides the rest of the day. She wrapped her hands around the mug the way she did when she didn't know exactly what to do with them. I've been thinking about your quote, she said, in the magazine piece, about finding out what a person is when they don't know they're being watched. You did your research. After the fact, she said, which is the wrong order. Something moved in his expression. Not warmth exactly, recognition maybe. The look of someone watching a person arrive at a conclusion they'd been waiting to see arrive. Why do you do it that way? She asked. The no announcement, no introduction. You must know most rooms fail. Most do, he said. He picked up his coffee. That's the information, and the ones that don't. Those are the partners. She looked at him. He looked back at her without particular urgency. We failed, she said. Your lobby failed, he said. You called. He paused. Those aren't the same thing. She held that for a moment. Is the decision final, she said. As a rule, he said, but not always. He was quiet. Outside the diner window, the morning was doing what mornings did in this part of the city, filling up gradually, the foot traffic thickening, the sound of it coming up through the glass. There's something I need to tell you, he said finally. And it's not my business to tell you, except that I think it should be someone's business, and the someone who can do something about it probably needs to be you. She looked at him. The intermediary who made first contact about this partnership, he said. A man named Douglas Fenn. You know who he is? He's on our development advisory board, she said. He contacted my team 8 weeks before your formal proposal, Nathan said. He represented himself as acting on the hotel's behalf. He outlined a partnership structure that included a consulting arrangement for a firm he described as closely connected to your ownership group. He said it was a standard part of how the Hargrove approached major deals. Meridith's hands went still on the mug. That consulting arrangement, Nathan said. It was never in any version of the proposal your team sent us. She didn't say anything for a moment. The diner moved around them, Bev calling out an order, someone's chair scraping, the coffee machine cycling. Who chairs our development advisory board? She said, though she already knew. I think you know, Nathan said. I think you've known something was off for a while and haven't had a clear enough look at it to be sure. She thought about the last 8 months, the renovation budget reviews that had gone sideways, the vendor contracts that had been renegotiated without her approval, the advisory fee structures that her CFO Gerald had flagged twice and been told by the board to table for further review. She thought about Douglas Fenn in particular, his particular way of being in a room. The warmth that was always slightly ahead of the reason for it, like something he sent in advance of himself to make the temperature comfortable before he arrived. I need to think, she said. Nathan nodded. He didn't offer to help. He didn't lean forward and suggest a plan. He drank his coffee and looked out the window and gave her the room to think, which was, she realized, an unusual thing for a man in a position of power to give a person he didn't owe anything to. Why are you telling me this? She said. He looked at her. Because you came here yourself, he said. And because you said the right thing on the phone, and you said it like you meant it. He paused. And because my daughter is 9 years old, and she's going to grow up in a world built by the decisions people make in rooms, and I'd rather those rooms be run by people who notice when they've gotten it wrong. She looked at her coffee. That's a lot of weight to put on a diner conversation, she said. Maybe, he said, and something in his face did the thing she hadn't seen before, not quite a smile, but in the territory. She went back to the hotel and she started pulling threads. Gerald Park confirmed what she'd already begun to suspect within 48 hours. He came to her office on a Wednesday evening when the floor was quiet, and he closed the door, which he only did when the news was the kind that didn't improve with an audience. He put a single page of handwritten notes on her desk. His handwriting was small and careful, the handwriting of someone who had been precise with numbers his entire working life and brought that precision to everything. Douglas Fenn's advisory firm, a company called Pinnacle Consulting Group, was the primary beneficiary of a fee arrangement embedded in the hotel's last 3 major vendor contracts. The arrangement had been structured through 2 intermediary service agreements that referenced a holding entity Gerald had traced to a registered agent in Delaware. The registered agent's client list, as much of it as was public, included one other entry of interest, a private investment vehicle that Fenn had disclosed at his advisory board appointment 7 years ago as a personal financial interest and that no one had looked at since. The amounts weren't small. Across 30 months, the redirected fees totaled just under $1.8 million. Not enough to collapse the hotel's finances, carefully calibrated not to. Enough to be significant. Enough to represent a systematic pattern if you had the patience and the access to see the full picture. How long have you suspected? She asked. Gerald looked at the window. I flagged an anomaly in the vendor review 14 months ago, he said. I submitted a memo to the advisory board's finance subcommittee. Who chairs the finance subcommittee? Gerald looked at her. She sat with that for a long moment. Who else knows about this? You and me, he said. I haven't said anything because I didn't know what I was looking at clearly enough, and because he's on the board and I wasn't sure. He stopped. You weren't sure if I knew, she said. Yes, he said. I'm sorry. Don't be, she said. It's the right instinct when you don't know who knows what. That's exactly how these things survive. She thought about Nathan saying the someone who can do something about it probably needs to be you. She thought about him looking out the diner window, giving her room to think. I need you to pull everything, she said to Gerald. Every advisory contract, every vendor we brought on after a board recommendation, every fee arrangement that touches Pinnacle or anything connected to it. I need the full picture before I move. Gerald nodded. He picked up his notes. How long do I have? I need it by Friday morning, she said, not Friday afternoon. He stood. At the door he stopped and turned back. Meridith. He only used her first name when he decided something was important enough to require it. Be careful who you tell. Already ahead of you, she said. She spent Thursday working, not in a visible way. She answered calls, ran her 11 o'clock, walked the lobby at the hour she always walked it, exchanged the usual words with the usual people. She was good at this, the surface running clean while the deeper water moved in a different direction. She'd spent 7 years building the surface. She knew how it worked. Thursday evening, she called the hotel's external legal counsel, a woman named Patricia Ruiz, who had been handling hospitality litigation for 25 years and who answered on the second ring. You're calling late, Patricia said. It's that kind of situation. Tell me, she told her. The structure of it, not the names yet, just the outline, the pattern, the timeline. Patricia listened without interrupting, which was one of the things about her that Meridith had always found worth the hourly rate. What you're describing is a breach of fiduciary duty at minimum, Patricia said when she finished. Possibly wire fraud depending on how the fee structures were transmitted and documented. I need everything your CFO has by Friday end of business. I need it formatted clean, not handwritten notes. A pause. And I need you not to confront this person before I've seen the documents. I understand. Who else knows? My CFO, me, and an external party who observed an approach that was made to them without my knowledge. That external party, Patricia said. Is that your potential Whitfield partner? Yes. Is he willing to provide a written account of what he observed? She thought about the diner booth, about Nathan's face when he'd said those aren't the same thing. I don't know, she said honestly. He was clear that this had to be my business to handle. I don't want to ask him unless I've done the work myself first. Patricia was quiet for a moment. That's the right instinct, she said. Do the work, then ask. She did the work. Gerald's full compilation arrived Friday at 7:58 a.m. 104 pages, organized by date, tabbed and cross-referenced with the particular thoroughness of someone who had been carrying this quietly for 14 months and was relieved to finally hand it to someone who could use it. She read it at her desk. She ate a granola bar she found in her bag and didn't taste it. She read every page. What emerged wasn't a single act of betrayal. It was a pattern of small ones, layered over each other, each individually defensible, collectively a picture of someone who had spent years treating the organization as a resource to be harvested from the inside. 3 vendor contracts with embedded fee arrangements. 2 advisory engagements that had paid out substantially above market rate. 1 development opportunity, a promising property acquisition 3 years ago that had died on a board recommendation and been acquired 8 months later by an entity with a co-investment arrangement that, if you followed the thread, linked back to Douglas Fenn's private investment vehicle. He hadn't just been skimming, he'd been steering. She sat with that for a long time. Then she called Patricia back. She also, after thinking about it for 2 hours, sent a short text to the number she'd saved as Whitfield office. I've done the work you suggested I do. I'm not asking for your involvement. I'm asking if you'd be willing to document what you observed about the approach that was made to you, not a legal filing, just a written account. I understand if the answer is no. She put the phone down. She told herself not to watch it. She watched it for 4 minutes. His reply was 7 words. What you find has to be yours first. She looked at it. Then she typed back, it is. I built it. 3 minutes later, send me your lawyer's contact. I'll have my team reach her by end of day. She exhaled. Outside her window, the city was doing its Friday thing, the particular energy of a morning that knew it was the last working one of the week. She looked at the hotel's lobby from the window, the way she always looked at it, tracking the movement, reading the room from 14 floors up. She thought about Douglas Fenn, who would be in the building this afternoon for the weekly advisory check-in that she had scheduled and intended to keep as if nothing had changed, because Patricia had told her clearly, do not let him know you're looking. She didn't let him know she was looking. The emergency board meeting was called for the following Monday. She submitted the formal request Sunday evening through the legal channel, the way the bylaws required, citing the emergency integrity provision and listing Gerald and Patricia as supporting parties. She'd spent Sunday preparing. Not reviewing documents, she'd internalized the document. She was past that stage. She spent Sunday walking herself through the room, the board table, the order of chairs, the way Douglas Fenn would sit at the far end and arrange his expression into something that had always read as collegial and now read as something else entirely. She'd been in that room hundreds of times. She knew where every exit was. She knew which board members listened with their bodies leaning forward and which ones sat back and waited to decide. She knew what Douglas would do when she started laying it out. He would be warm. He would be the most reasonable person in the room. He would suggest she was overextended from the Whitfield collapse, that these were understandable concerns that deserved a measured review process, not an emergency session. He would look at the other board members with the particular expression of a man who'd spent years building trust specifically so he could spend it in moments like this. She was not going to let him spend it. She walked through every version of his response. She mapped her answers. She wrote nothing down for this specific exercise, because some things you kept out of writing until you were ready to put them in front of people who could act on them. Monday morning, she was at the hotel by 6:30. Her head of operations, a steady woman named Roz, who had been with the hotel for 11 years and who knew when something was moving without being told, looked at her when she came off the elevator and said simply, "You need anything from me?" "Keep the morning normal," Meridith said. "I need the lobby to look like a regular Monday." Roz nodded once and asked nothing else. At 9:45, Patricia arrived. At 9:50, Gerald came up from his office. They sat in the small conference room on the 12th floor, the one that looked out onto the internal courtyard instead of the street, and Patricia walked them through the sequence one final time. "Lead with the vendor fee pattern," Patricia said. 3 contracts, the dates, the amounts, the routing. Don't start with his name. Let the board see what the pattern looks like before they see whose name is on the other end of it. She looked at Meridith. When they make the connection themselves, they own it. When you give them the name first, they protect against it. "He'll try to call for a recess," Gerald said. Under the emergency integrity provision, a sitting CEO cannot be interrupted during active disclosure, Patricia said. Quote Section 12, Clause 2, and keep going. Meridith looked at both of them. What about the Whitfield account? Nathan's written statement. Patricia opened her folder. His team sent a 6-page document late Friday, clean, specific, naming Douglas Fenn's intermediary by name, documenting the date and terms of the approach, and confirming that those terms had never appeared in any version of the formal proposal. She paused. It's the strongest piece of external corroboration you could have. Use it last, after the internal evidence. The internal evidence builds the structure. Nathan's account closes the door. Meridith nodded. One more thing, Patricia said. She sat back slightly, which was a gesture Meridith had come to read as the signal that what came next was the part that couldn't be prepared for on paper. He's going to look at you at some point during this presentation. Not at the board. At you. And he's going to do it in a way that is intended to make you feel like the problem in the room, like the one who has misunderstood something important, who is acting on incomplete information, who is perhaps not as ready for this role as she should be. Meridith held her gaze. What do I do? You look back at him, Patricia said, and you don't look away first. The boardroom on the 14th floor was the best room in the hotel. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides, a mahogany table that seated 18, and a view of the city that on clear days went all the way to the water. Today was clear, the kind of Monday morning that arrived looking like a promise. Meridith was there at 9:50, 10 minutes before the scheduled start, setting her documents at the head of the table. Her chair. She'd made that decision in advance, which end of the table belonged to the CEO, and she was sitting there before anyone else arrived. The board filed in over the next 8 minutes. 6 independent directors, the hotel's general counsel, 2 members of the finance committee. Douglas Fenn arrived at 10:03, 2 minutes late, which told her something. He'd spent those 2 minutes in the hallway reading the room before he entered it. He came in with the warmth already running, shaking hands, making brief contact with each person, the practiced ease of a man who'd been doing this for 7 years and had gotten very good at it. He looked at Meridith at the head of the table. Something crossed his face fast, a recalibration, and then the warmth came back. Meridith, he said, with the particular tone he used when he wanted to establish that they were on the same side before anything started. Unusual format for a Monday morning. It is, she said. Thank you for coming. He settled into his seat. He looked at the bound document in front of her. He looked at Patricia. He looked at Gerald. She watched him read the room and decide how to hold his expression, and he decided on relaxed, which was the right decision and the wrong one, because it told her exactly how confident he was. She began. She walked them through the vendor contracts first. 3 of them in chronological order, the fee arrangements, the routing, the amounts. She quoted figures from Gerald's report without looking at them because she'd memorized every number. She watched the board members' faces, the finance committee chair leaning forward, one of the independent directors writing something small and precise on his notepad, the general counsel going very still. She did not look at Douglas. She presented the advisory fee structures. She walked through the property acquisition from 3 years ago, the one that had died on a board recommendation and been picked up 8 months later by the connected entity. She laid it out without adjectives, without editorializing, and let the timeline make the argument for her. She heard Douglas shift in his chair. I'd like to pause here, he said. His voice was smooth. He'd decided on measured concern. I think there's significant context that's being presented in an incomplete way, and I'd like to address. Under Section 12, Clause 2 of the hotel's governance bylaws, Meridith said without raising her voice. An active integrity disclosure by a sitting CEO cannot be interrupted until the disclosure is complete. I'd ask you to hold your response until I've finished. She looked at him directly. The 3 seconds Patricia had told her about. She held it. Thank you, Douglas. The room went very quiet. She looked back at her documents and continued. She presented Nathan's written statement last. She introduced it as an external account obtained voluntarily from a principal in the withdrawn Whitfield Development Partnership. She did not say his name. The document was attributed to an outside investor, which was sufficient for the board's purposes and preserved the boundary Nathan had set. She read 3 excerpts. The first named the intermediary. The second documented the terms that had been communicated and who had been represented as authorizing them. The third gave the date, 8 weeks before the formal proposal her team had submitted, and confirmed that those terms had never appeared anywhere in that proposal. She set the document down. She looked up. The Finance Committee chair was looking at Douglas, so were 3 of the independent directors. The general counsel had stopped writing. Douglas looked at her. This was the moment Patricia had described. She saw it happen exactly as Patricia said it would. The slight forward lean, the expression settling into something that wanted to read as wounded authority, the look of a man who'd spent 7 years building credibility in this room and was reaching for it now. She looked back at him. She did not look away. "These are serious allegations," he said, and his voice had lost some of its smoothness, just at the edges, just enough for her to hear it. "And I want to be clear that I take them seriously. But what we're looking at here is a set of circumstantial connections and a statement from an unnamed external party presented in the context of a significant business setback." He looked around the table. "I think what this organization deserves is proportionality. A formal internal review, not an emergency session driven by James," Meridith said, addressing the board's senior independent director. "Would you read the fiduciary duty provision from Section 9? James read it. It was 12 words with very little interpretive room. "A documented pattern of fee redirection benefiting a connected party across 30 months, Meridith said, with an external account corroborating an undisclosed approach to a major prospective partner, satisfies the standard for emergency review under that provision." She looked at the full table. "I'm not asking this board to reach a verdict," she said. "I'm asking you to authorize an independent audit of every transaction, advisory engagement, and development recommendation involving Douglas Fenn for the past 4 years. And I'm moving under the emergency provision that he recuse himself from all board activities until the audit concludes." Silence. The kind that had weight. Douglas put both hands on the table. "I've given 7 years to this hotel," he said. 7 years, and I think everyone in this room knows. "Margaret," said one of the independent directors. Her name was Lena Holt, and she had been on this board for 12 years and rarely spoke at length, but when she did, the room listened. She was looking at Douglas with an expression that was not angry, exactly, but was entirely without the warmth it had carried every other time Meridith had watched them interact. "I think we've heard the disclosure. I'd like to call the vote." Douglas looked at Lena. Something shifted in his face. Not collapse. He was too disciplined for collapse. More like watching a load-bearing wall develop a crack. The structure still standing, still trying to look structural, but something fundamentally different about the way the weight was sitting on it. "I'd like to speak to council before any vote," he said. "You're welcome to do that after," Lena said. She looked at Patricia. "Is the motion properly constituted?" "It is," Patricia said. "Then let's vote." The motion for an independent audit passed 6-1. The motion for Douglas's recusal pending the audit passed 6-1. The one dissenting vote both times was Douglas's own. He voted looking straight ahead, his jaw set, and then he stood and straightened his jacket and looked at Meridith. He used the voice she'd never heard before, the one under the warmth, smaller and harder and less impressive than what he used for rooms. "You're making a mistake," he said. "I don't think I am," she said. He left. The door closed. She stood at the head of the table and breathed. Lena Holt caught her eye from across the table and gave her one slow nod, the kind that carried more than a sentence. The kind that meant I saw what that took, and it was the right thing. Meridith nodded back. She sat down when the room had mostly cleared because her legs were doing something she didn't want to display while people were still walking past. She put her hands flat on the table and looked at the city through the glass. Her phone was face down on the table. She turned it over and typed a message to the number she had saved as Whitfield office. "Board voted. Audit authorized. He's recused." She looked at it for a moment and added, "I didn't look away." She sent it. She picked up her documents and stood. She looked at the room one more time. The view, the mahogany table, the empty chair at the far end where Douglas had spent 7 years sitting. The chair was pushed slightly back from the table at the angle a person leaves when they stand in a hurry and don't push it in. She had a hotel to run. Ross was at her desk outside the boardroom when she came off the elevator. She looked up and looked at Meridith's face and said, "I'll have Gerald on standby and your communications lead staged for 1 o'clock. Push it to noon," Meridith said. "Done." Ross was already dialing. The employees came first. She wrote them herself, not with communications team polish, and her head of PR argued against it, and she did it anyway, because the people who worked in this building deserved a letter that sounded like the person they'd been watching run the place for 7 years. She told them the truth in plain language. A board member had been removed pending an independent audit. The hotel's operations were not affected. She was not going anywhere. She ended by saying that the hotel her staff had built together was worth protecting, and that the reason it was worth protecting was because of the people who showed up every day and did the work. By end of business, she had received 93 individual replies. Some were a single line. Several were from people she'd worked beside for years. A handful were from junior staff whose names she knew from the lobby and not much else. The common thread in all of them was not reassurance seeking. It was something quieter and more specific, the feeling of people who had sensed something off in the walls and had finally been told that yes, it was real, and someone had seen it. She kept those messages. The audit took 8 weeks. Sandra Mills, the lead from the independent firm, was thorough in the specific way of someone who had decided years ago not to be affected by the drama surrounding the numbers, only by the numbers themselves. She delivered the final report in person on a Thursday morning in early December, with Patricia and Gerald present, and walked them through it with the calm of a person who considered this the most honest service she could provide. The scope was wider than Meridith had expected. 4 years of redirected fees, not the 30 months she'd identified. A 5th vendor contract she hadn't found. 2 additional development recommendations that had followed the same pattern. Opportunities buried on Douglas's recommendation, acquired later by connected entities. The total financial impact was approximately $2.4 million. The referral to the relevant authorities was submitted the same afternoon. In the weeks after that, Meridith did the work. She rebuilt the vendor review process with Gerald leading it. She restructured the advisory board's conflict of interest disclosures, widening the scope and tightening the procedure so that the ambiguity Douglas had used as cover wouldn't be available to anyone who came after. She sat in on Gerald's training sessions for the new access controls, which surprised him. "You didn't have to be here for this," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm here." She exchanged occasional messages with Nathan, not frequently. A few times a month, brief updates that he didn't technically need, but which she sent because they felt right, and because he always replied, usually with a question that was really just a way of staying in contact without performing it. He asked once how the audit was going. She asked once how Maisie's rock collection was developing. He said she had recently reclassified 14 specimens that her teacher had labeled incorrectly and presented the corrections with documented sources. Meridith had read that in the lobby of her hotel on a Tuesday evening and laughed properly for the first time in 6 weeks. The formal proposal was ready in January. She'd rebuilt it from the ground up, taking her time, building it at the pace that quality required rather than the pace that urgency demanded. The urgency of October had been a symptom of crisis. This was deliberate. She called his assistant on a Tuesday and asked for a meeting at Nathan's convenience. She said she wasn't asking for anything except the chance to present what she'd built. She said she'd understand if the answer was no. His assistant called back in 20 minutes. "He's available Thursday at 10. He'll come to you." She spent Wednesday the way she'd spent Sundays before the board meeting, not reviewing documents, walking herself through the room. The lobby this time. What it should look like. What it should feel like when someone walked in carrying a gas station coffee and a bag with a broken zipper. She spoke to Roz that afternoon. She told her what she was thinking. Roz listened and then said, "I can have the training module updated by end of week. I'd like to do it myself," Meridith said. "With you. And I want the full lobby team there." Roz looked at her for a moment. "Okay," she said. Nathan arrived Thursday at 9:57. He came through the main entrance without announcement, which she'd expected this time, and she was in the lobby herself, not behind the desk and not in conversation with anyone, just there, the way the lobby required someone to be there when it mattered. He had the same bag. Different jacket, but the same quality of unremarkability, the gas station coffee cup. He walked through the door and stopped when he saw her standing there and looked at her with the expression she'd first seen in the diner. Unhurried, attentive, the particular quality of a man who'd spent a long time learning to read situations and had found one that surprised him slightly. "Mrs. Cane," he said. "Mr. Whitfield," she said. "Welcome to the Hargrove Grand." She gestured toward the lobby. "Can I show you around?" He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. "I think you can." They walked the property for 40 minutes before they sat down. She showed him the things she'd meant to show him in October and the things she hadn't thought to show him then. The staff entrance on the east side where the morning shift started at 5, and the smell was coffee and clean linen, the maintenance level where Gerald's team had installed the new access controls, the ballroom where 3 of her longest-serving banquet staff had worked for 20 years and knew every name and preference of every recurring client without looking at a system. She introduced him to people. She knew their names, and they knew she knew them, which was a different thing than a name tag. At some point during the walk, he said simply, "Your lobby team stopped me on the way in." "I know," she said. "They were supposed to." He looked at her. "I spent 40 minutes with the full team on Tuesday," she said. "We talked about what happened in October. We talked about what it means to treat every person who comes through that door as someone worth knowing. Then we practiced it." She paused. "Your lobby failed you in October. It shouldn't do that again." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Maisie wanted me to ask if your hotel has a geology display anywhere." She blinked. "We have a natural history piece in the mezzanine. It's been there since the original renovation." "She's going to want to see it," he said. It was the tone she recognized, the one he used for facts about Maisie. Plain, certain, no apology in it. "She's welcome anytime," Meridith said. They sat in the hotel's smaller meeting room and she walked him through the proposal. 41 pages. Everything earned. He asked good questions, the kind that came from having actually read it rather than positioning around it, and she answered them directly, including 2 places where the honest answer was, "I don't have that fully resolved yet. Here's how I'm planning to get there," which she said without difficulty because October had taught her what pride cost, and she'd learned to spend it more carefully. When he reached the governance section, the new conflict of interest framework, the vendor review process, the access controls, he read it twice. "This is more detailed than most proposals include," he said. "I'm not offering you the same hotel you walked into in October," she said. "The proposal should reflect that." He looked at the page. "I want one change," he said. "Minor. I'll have my team send it today." She looked at him. "Subject to that change," he said. "I'm in." She held that for a moment. The room was quiet. The city outside the window was doing what it always did, ongoing, indifferent in the way that cities were indifferent, the enormous ordinary world continuing while the smaller, truer things happened inside it. "Thank you," she said. "We'll build something good here," he said. Not encouragement, just what he thought was true. "I know we will," she said. They shook hands. She walked him back to the lobby, and when he reached the main entrance, he stopped and turned back. "Maisie finished a drawing last week," he said. "She drew our kitchen from memory, every detail. She's been drawing buildings lately. She said she wants to draw this one." He looked at the lobby with the expression of a man seeing something he hadn't expected to see when he first came through the door. "I think I'd like her to." "Tell her to come," Meridith said. "Tell her I'll show her the mezzanine myself." He nodded once. He walked out through the main entrance and into the late January morning, and Meridith watched him go and then turned back to the lobby. Her lobby, the one she'd built over 7 years and was still building, the one that had failed on a Tuesday in October and had been corrected on a Thursday in January, and would need correcting again in ways she couldn't anticipate yet, and would be corrected again because that was the work. She looked at Bev at the front desk, who looked back at her. "Good meeting?" Bev said. "Yes," Meridith said, "a good meeting." She took the elevator up. The 14th floor was quiet in the middle of the morning, the particular stillness of a building between things. She went to her office and sat down and looked at the city through the glass and felt something she hadn't felt in the months since October. Not triumph, not relief, exactly, but the specific quiet weight of a thing that had been carried being set down in the right place. She reached for her phone. She typed a message to her CFO, "Gerald, we're building something new. Thank you for carrying it until I could see it too." She set the phone down. She looked at the lobby below through the window, the movement of it, the guests coming and going, the morning light on the floor she'd walked 1,000 times. Somewhere in the city, a 9-year-old with a sketchbook was probably already planning which building to draw next. Meridith thought she could make a case for this one.